When we moved into Greenbridge Hollow, I didn't expect a welcome just peace. The house was modest, but it had strong bones and a flat front yard, perfect for the ramp I planned to build for my son, Jalen. He's 10. Bright as a sunrise, tougher than anyone I know. Born with a rare spinal condition, he's been in a wheelchair since 3. That ramp wasn't a renovation, it was a necessity. I built it myself. 2 weekends of sawing, measuring, and praying the HOA wouldn't notice. They did. Her name was Denise Langford. Black blazer, pearls, and the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. She came by with a clipboard and a too-sweet tone. "We just like to maintain a certain charm in Greenbridge," she said, glancing at the ramp like it was a weed in her rose garden. "You understand, the standard look." Then came the line I'd never forget. "That ramp doesn't fit it." I didn't argue. I just nodded and added her name to the front of my notebook. The letter came 3 days after Denise's visit, formal, cold, and printed on HOA letterhead thick enough to double as armor. It accused us of aesthetic violations and warned that our modifications posed a threat to property values. No signature at the bottom, just, "On behalf of the Greenbridge Hollow Homeowners Association." But we both knew who sent it. I didn't say much, just folded it, slid it into my notebook, and got back to work. The ramp still needed side rails. Jalen's safety came before anyone's comfort, especially hers. People started noticing, you could feel it, the shift. Neighbors who once waved now looked away. Some crossed the street without meaning to. A couple walked their dogs slower near our driveway, eyes lingering on the ramp like it offended them personally. But no one said a word. Silence, I'd come to learn, is the HOA's favorite language. One afternoon, while I was smoothing concrete at the base of the path, Denise reappeared. She didn't walk up this time. She stood in the middle of the cul-de-sac like she was on a stage, hands on her hips, voice raised just enough for the nearby porches to hear. "If they need special access," she said, voice dripping with manufactured concern. "Maybe they need a special neighborhood." I looked up, my hand still on the trowel. Across the street, a curtain twitched. Someone's garage door slowly closed. I didn't respond. Jalen was watching from the window. So I gave her the only answer that mattered. I kept building. It started with the delivery truck. We were expecting a medical equipment shipment for Jalen, some braces, custom cushions, a portable shower chair, things most folks never have to think about. The driver tried to back into our driveway, but someone had parked a white SUV too close, blocking the entrance halfway. Denise's car. Again. When I stepped outside to ask her to move it, she didn't even look up from her flower bed across the street. Just waved one hand, like brushing off a fly. "Oh, was that me? Silly me," she said, smiling at her roses. The next morning I opened the front door and found the steps soaked, puddles pooled across the wood, the ramp slick and dangerous. The lawn was dry, so was the sidewalk. Only the ramp and the first 3 steps were soaked. A garden hose still hung from Denise's front faucet. I didn't say a word. I just wiped it dry, checked the grip tape, and scribbled something in my leather notebook. I didn't keep it for revenge, just truth. Date, time, what she did, who might have seen. Facts speak louder than fury. By the end of the week, the whispers had started. At the mailbox, a man in golf shorts murmured to his wife. They could have picked somewhere more suitable. On a walk, 2 women slowed their pace behind me, not knowing I could hear every word. Poor kid, but, this neighborhood wasn't designed for that. That ramp is just, it throws the whole vibe off. Then, one afternoon, the worst came not from an adult, but a child. Jalen had wheeled out to the edge of our driveway, sketchpad in his lap, drawing birds in the maple tree. A boy rode by on his scooter, probably 10 or 11 slowed, stared at the ramp, then at Jalen. "You're the reason our neighborhood's ugly," he muttered, then kicked off again. Jalen didn't cry. He just turned slowly back toward the house, his face blank, lips pressed together like he was holding something in. I met him halfway down the ramp. "Want to finish that drawing inside, champ?" He nodded, didn't say a word. I opened the door for him, and just as he crossed the threshold, a loud slam echoed across the street. Denise's door shut hard enough to rattle her porch lantern. as if the whole scene needed punctuation. Inside, Jalen rolled toward his room. I stood at the kitchen window, notebook in hand. My pen hovered for a moment over the page. Thursday, 5:12 p.m. Boy on scooter, white shirt, blue helmet. You're the reason our neighborhood's ugly. Denise slammed door at 5:15. I closed the notebook and placed it on the shelf. No anger, no loud words, not yet. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that grows roots. The kind of quiet that remembers. It was one of those rare, gentle mornings where the air smelled like fresh-cut grass and everything felt still, peaceful. Jalen sat at the top of the ramp I'd built with my own hands, sketchpad open across his knees, pencil in hand. He was drawing the neighbor's cat-a-lazy, fat tabby that had claimed our porch like it was royalty. His wheelchair tilted slightly, catching the morning light, his brows furrowed in concentration. Inside, I was watching him from the kitchen window, coffee in hand. I remember thinking how far we'd come. How, despite everything, this ramp, this porch, this sketchbook in Jalen's lap, it all meant we were building something real, stable. And then I saw her. Denise Langford. Black blazer even on a spring day, her lips painted too red, walking that tiny, yapping dog of hers like she owned the street. We'd gotten used to her presence hovering near the sidewalk, sending HOA emails disguised as reminders, acting like she was the gatekeeper of civility. But this morning was different. She passed our house like usual, but halfway down the block, she stopped. Then turned. I watched as she slowly walked back, her heels clicking against the pavement. She stood at the edge of our driveway, watching Jalen. He didn't notice at first. He was too focused on the curve of the cat's back, tongue peeking out slightly as he sketched. And then she said it. "Why don't you people stay where you belong?" Jalen's pencil stopped mid-stroke. He looked up confused, blinking into the sun. I froze. From inside the house, her words sounded muffled, but clear enough, the kind that didn't need volume to cut through you. Jalen didn't cry, didn't shout. He just answered in the quietest, surest voice I'd ever heard from him. "I live here." That should have been the end. But Denise stepped forward onto our driveway now. And with one practiced motion, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small black canister. My heart dropped. I'd seen it before, standard issue pepper spray, carried by people who wanted to feel powerful without ever being in danger. "No," I shouted, bolting toward the door. But I was too far. With a flick of her thumb, she sprayed a burning orange mist directly into Jalen's face. His scream was instant and shattering. The sketchbook hit the porch with a hollow thud. He clawed at his eyes, twisting in the chair, his wheels hitting the ramp's edge. His voice cracked as he gasped for air, sobbing between coughs. I ran barefoot, spilling coffee behind me down the porch steps and onto the ramp. I reached him, dropped to my knees, and cradled him against my chest. "It's okay, son, Daddy's here, breathe, I got you." He was trembling violently, his hands pawing at his face, raw and red, tears pouring uncontrollably. Behind me, I heard the unmistakable sound of heels clicking closer. Denise stood just a few feet away, her arms crossed, her expression blank. "I felt threatened," she said coolly. I turned, barely able to contain the fury in my chest. "He's 10 years old." She shrugged. "You people are always playing the victim." My fists clenched, but I didn't move. Jalen needed me, not my anger. My wife came rushing from inside, barefoot, her hands covering her mouth when she saw the scene. She dropped to the ground beside us, pulling Jalen into her arms, rocking him back and forth. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Miguel's father, the neighbor across the street, sprinting toward us holding a plastic gallon of milk. "This'll help," he panted, opening the cap. He poured it gently over Jalen's face, and the crying softened. Just a little. The pain was still there, but so was the kindness. A minute later, we heard sirens. When the officers arrived, Denise was already walking back to her house, canister still in hand. She told them we had threatened her. She told them she had acted in self-defense. The officer, young, pale, unsure, glanced between us and her. The milk still dripped from Jalen's chin, his shirt was soaked. My wife was crying quietly, holding his hand like it might disappear. The other officer stepped forward. "Sir," he said gently. Would you like to press charges? I didn't answer. Not right away. Instead, I walked into the house. My legs felt heavy. Each step slow. Deliberate. I went to the drawer where I kept what I hadn't used in years. A black leather badge wallet. I opened it, turned back to the officers, and held it up. My name is Franklin Cole. I am the former Chief Justice of the Maryland Supreme Court. And Yeshi will be charged. I looked at Denise. For the first time since we moved in. She looked afraid. The street was silent, save for the low hum of the patrol car engine and the soft sobs of my son, still nestled in his mother's arms. The scent of milk, pepper spray, and raw fear lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. The officers had just arrived, 2 men in blue stepping out cautiously, their eyes scanning the scene. Denise was already in performance mode. She stood on her long arms crossed, chin high, face painted with the most convincing mask of indignation a woman like her could conjure. She lunged at me, she said, voice pitched to just the right frequency of trembling offense. That child, he wheeled right at me. I didn't know what he was going to do. I had to protect myself. She held up the pepper spray canister like a badge of honor, as if the scene before them son's red, swollen face, his trembling hands. The milk-stained wheelchair were mere background noise in her story of self-preservation. The younger officer looked uncertain. He turned toward me, then to the boy, then back at Denise. The crowd had begun to form. Neighbors. Familiar faces behind fences and porch railings. But none of them spoke. They watched, silent as gravestones. No one dared step forward. Maybe they were afraid of the HOA. Maybe they were waiting to see which way the wind would blow. Except one. Miguel. A wiry boy of maybe 12, baseball cap turned backward, phone still clutched in his hand. His fingers were shaking, but his eyes were steady. I recorded everything, he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it landed like thunder. Everyone turned. Denise flinched. The older officer stepped forward. May we see the video, son? Miguel nodded and handed it over without hesitation. The 3 of us watched together. The footage was grainy, handheld, but the truth never needed polish. There it was. Denise's voice, sharp and clear. Why don't you people stay where you belong? Jalen's answer, I live here. And then the spray. No threat, no provocation. Just cruelty, clean and deliberate. The officer turned back to me. His face had changed, firmer now, resolved. Sir, he said quietly, do you want to press charges? I looked at him. I looked at Jalen, his face blotched and raw, head resting on his mother's shoulder. I looked at Denise, still standing tall, though her posture had stiffened. Her eyes darted between the officers, the neighbors, Miguel. And then I reached into my coat pocket. It had been years since I touched it. A thin black leather wallet worn, soft around the edges. I opened it slowly and held it up. The gold glint caught the light. Chief Justice Emeritus, State of Maryland. The officer blinked. The younger one straightened. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. She will be charged, I said calmly. No one questioned it. Not the officers, not the neighbors, not even Denise, who now stood frozen in place, as if realizing for the first time that her rules no longer applied here. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy. Heavy with the truth. Heavy with the shame of every fence-sitter who hadn't spoken. Heavy with the knowledge that her world, her little kingdom of unchecked power, was crumbling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. One of the officers stepped forward, asked Miguel's parents for permission to retain the video as evidence. They agreed without hesitation. Denise was escorted to the squad Carnot in cuffs, not yet, but she didn't walk with the same posture anymore. Her shoulders had dropped. Her eyes stayed on the pavement. Before getting in, she turned back one last time, opened her mouth like she wanted to speak. But nothing came out. For the first time since we moved here, Denise Langford was speechless. And I? I simply stood on my porch, next to my wife and my son, and watched justice begin quietly, without fury or vengeance, just a badge, a boy with a phone, and the weight of truth too strong to ignore. The courtroom smelled of varnished wood and old air. Everything inside it felt still too still, like the world was holding its breath. Denise sat at the defense table in a stiff gray suit, pearl necklace tight around her throat, as if trying to hang onto the illusion of control. Her lawyer, a man who looked exhausted before opening argument, flipped papers with a nervous tick. Denise didn't flinch. She sat upright, jaw tight, arms folded like she was still in charge of a homeowners meeting instead of facing criminal charges. The courtroom was full. Neighbors who had once watched from behind blinds now showed up in suits and cardigans. Some sat quietly, some couldn't meet our eyes. And then there was Miguel, sitting near the front beside his father. The phone in his pocket held more truth than Denise had spoken her entire life. When the prosecution played the footage, the room fell silent. The screen flickered, grainy sidewalk, birds chirping faintly in the background, then her voice. "Why don't you people stay where you belong?" Jalen's soft reply. "I live here." And then before anyone could blink, her hand went into the purse. A sharp movement. A hiss of orange. A scream. No threat, no aggression, just a woman weaponizing her bias in broad daylight. The sound of Jalen crying Jeevan through the phone's speaker was enough to make the woman in the front row dab at her eyes with a tissue. "Denise?" She didn't blink. She stared ahead as if bored, as if the footage was a tedious delay to the real injustice, that she was being questioned at all. Her lawyer rose. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what you saw was not malice, but a moment of panic. My client feared for her safety. She reacted perhaps too quickly, but in good faith." He tried to paint her as vigilant, concerned, misunderstood. Then it was my turn. I stood from the bench and walked to the witness stand. The prosecutor didn't ask many questions. They didn't need to. I placed my hand on the railing, let my eyes sweep across the courtroom, past the jury, past Denise, past the neighbors who had once averted their gaze. Then I said the only thing that mattered. This is not about one woman's hatred. It's about a system that gives her the silence of others to thrive in. Silence followed. But it wasn't Denise's kind of silence, the cold, dismissive kind. It was a silence that listened. The prosecutor closed with facts. Miguel's unaltered video. A medical report confirming chemical burns on Jalen's face. HOA complaints written in Denise's own handsome coded, some explicit. The defense tried one last tactic. Denise herself took the stand. "I've always cared about this community," she said, voice syrupy and rehearsed. "I was scared. You can't know what it's like to feel surrounded. Everything's changing." And then she looked directly at the jury and added, "People like them don't belong here. It was only a matter of time before something happened." Gasps echoed. The judge raised a brow. Her lawyer buried his face in his hands. The verdict came the next day. The jury foreperson stood, calm, steady. "We find the defendant guilty on all counts. Assault on a minor. Use of a chemical weapon on a child. Hate crime under Maryland Statute 10304B, motivated by disability and race." Denise's expression didn't crack until the judge added the sentencing date. Only then did the pearls around her neck seem to tighten. I didn't cheer, neither did my wife. We just sat with our son between us, holding his hands, listening to the weight of justice settle like dust after a storm. The same neighbors who once said nothing now nodded toward us with respect, not loud, not performative, but sincere. For the first time since we moved in, we weren't alone. And Denise Langford, self-declared gatekeeper of neighborhood standards, had finally been locked out of the gate. The sentence was handed down in a room so silent you could hear the ink dry on the paperwork. 8 years. That's how long Denise Langford would spend behind bars, no parole for the first 5. The judge's voice was steady, deliberate, echoing through the courtroom like a final gavel to her reign. In addition to her sentence, the court orders a civil penalty of $80,000 to be paid to the family of the victim. Furthermore, the defendant will complete 300 hours of court-supervised community services, specifically at a residential center for children with disabilities. I didn't cheer. Neither did my wife. We held Jalen's hands in silence, his small fingers curled around ours like roots finally finding soil. Denise didn't cry. Not in public. But something in her face cracked barely, but it was there. a cornered arrogance, meeting the wall of consequence. She was escorted out without a word. And just like that, Greenbridge Hollow's most powerful figure became its most condemned. In the days that followed, the fallout spread like fresh paint over a weathered fence. The HOA board resigned in full. Not out of remorse, more out of panic. Residents demanded accountability. And with every complaint pulled from dusty folders, every silent signature tied to discriminatory citations, the foundation of their authority crumbled. By the end of the month, Greenbridge Hollow HOA was dissolved. In its place, something new took root. A group of neighbors, those who had once been too quiet, too afraid, gathered under the old oak tree at the park. No titles, no hierarchy, just people tired of letting others decide who belonged. They called it Greenbridge Neighbors United. This time, it wasn't about fences or rules, it was about presence, about healing. And listening. The first act of this new chapter, reclaiming the park. It had long been ignored, the sandbox filled with weeds, the swing chains rusted, the path cracked. For years, it had mirrored the silence of the community, unspoken, neglected. But now, neighbors came together with tools and paint, flowers and wheelbarrows. Children ran through the grass while adults repaired benches. Someone donated new mulch. Another offered wheelchair-accessible picnic tables. We were invited to the rededication ceremony. And not just as guests, Jalen was asked to speak. At first, he said no, he didn't like attention. But a few nights later, as we ate dinner at the kitchen table, he looked up from his plate and said softly, "Maybe if I say it, people will listen." On the day of the event, the sun shone through the sycamores like it had never seen injustice. The park was filled. Neighbors young and old, kids with chalk-stained fingers, couples holding hands. Folding chairs circled the newly laid path. There were cupcakes, balloons, and laughter. But when Jalen wheeled himself to the front, a hush fell. No microphone, no speech. Just him, 10 years old, small hands resting calmly on his wheels, his eyes scanning a crowd that once looked past him. He took a breath and said, "I just want to play, not be afraid." That was all. 5 words. They settled into the grass, into the sky, into every corner of that park. Then came the clapping, not wild, not showy, but real. Parents stood. Some cried. Others just nodded, like they understood something now they hadn't before. Miguel ran up afterward and handed Jalen a water bottle like he'd just won a race. And in some way he had. That night, as dusk settled and fireflies blinked in the hedges, I sat on our porch with a blanket over my knees. Jalen was inside, showing my wife how to draw a cat, the proper way, as he called it. Across the street, where Denise's porch once radiated cold authority, the house stood dark and for sale. In its place, a neighborhood was learning to breathe again. Not perfect, not finished, but awake. And I thought, justice doesn't always come with headlines. Sometimes it comes in 5 quiet words from a child who never wanted power, only peace. I just want to play, not be afraid. 1 year later, the ramp was still there, worn smooth at the edges from small wheels and big mornings. Franklin Cole sat on his porch, coffee in hand, wrapped in a soft flannel against the early fall breeze. The wood beneath him creaked like it remembered everything. Across the yard, laughter erupted. Jalen, now a little taller and a lot more confident, raced down the sidewalk in his wheelchair with Miguel and 2 other neighborhood kids sprinting alongside him, their voices carrying through the air like music. The park had come alive, that summer, new swings, fresh paint, and a quiet understanding that everyone belonged. The kind of understanding you didn't put in a brochure but in the way people looked at each other now. A woman walked by with her dog, pausing to wave. "Good morning, Judge Cole." He nodded back, smile just barely lifting the corners of his lips. Not many called him that anymore, but when they did, it no longer carried weight, it carried respect. In the yard, near the edge of the grass where the sidewalk met the slope of the ramp, stood a simple wooden sign. Jalen had helped carve it. Burned into the grain were 12 quiet words. Justice is not power. It's the quiet that stands when no one else does. A few neighbors had asked about it. Most just nodded when they saw it, like they understood something without needing it explained. Franklin took another sip of coffee, his eyes following the curve of the ramp. Once, it had been a problem. Now, it was a path. Jalen wheeled past the porch, grinning. "Beat you again," he shouted over his shoulder to Miguel, who groaned in mock defeat. Franklin chuckled softly. Then he leaned back, eyes half closed, voice low meant only for the breeze and whoever cared enough to listen. "Some things aren't worth yelling about," he said. "They're worth standing for."